All right, thank you. Just think about this. I think you got to do something with this Jesus character. I don't think you can go around and say, "Oh, Jesus of Nazareth, he seems like a nice guy. I've never really thought about him that much." I don't think you can say that about the person who has been written about more than any other human being in the history of the world. I don't think you can just ignore him. This is what I might say and have said to a skeptical friend. I don't think you can do that because, quite frankly, you're not going to be respected as a human being, especially in today's age. And I don't know if you've noticed, but we're at each other's throats right now. More so than in any other time in recent history, we are more moralistic today than we were at any other time, including 1950s America or Victorian age London. And I think part of the reason of that, by the way, kind of a side note, is that we are no longer going to accept the collateral damage of modernity. The modern period, think of the Industrial Revolution, think of the Enlightenment up until about 2000 AD. And we're no longer going to accept that those people working in a factory or those people who have had the injustice of racism, those people that are ruining the environment, we're not going to accept these things anymore in the name of progress, and that's a pretty good thing. But we're also very moralistic in a super annoying way, so that we have to be really concerned about whether we use plastic straws or paper straws. And we got to be really concerned about where all of our food came from. Was it ethically sourced? And that's generally a good thing. But I think the impulse theologically is terrible because it is a desire. It is a desire to be self-righteous. It is to desire to be righteous by the law. And of all of this righteous indignation that you see on every platform, on every street corner, it seems, this righteous indignation to be more righteous than the person next to us. The bad part about that is that there's no mechanism for love, and that there is no mechanism for forgiveness in this new righteousness. There is only submission to the right way of thinking, and there is no mechanism for forgiveness. And so, as an apologist, I may want to turn that around on somebody and say, you have an opinion about everything. I mean everything. Like everything. All right? And you can't go around, and I respect that. You can't go around not having an opinion about the latest pop star or Donald Trump or whoever. I mean, I get it, but I don't think you can say, Jesus, he seems like a nice guy. You can't ignore the guy who has been written about more than any other person in the history of the world. And I think you who are righteously indignant about turtles and bananas and straws got to come to a conclusion about this Jesus fellow. And may I suggest you only have 4 options. And this is the ancient dilemma made famous by the Brits into a trilemma. I'm going to add one more just to flush it out, although it's really the trilemma, and we're going to call them the 4 L's. Either Jesus is legend, or he's liar, or he's lunatic, or he is who he claimed to be, and that is Lord Almighty. But you got to do something with this Jesus fellow if you're going to be a respected human being on this planet. And I don't think anybody can rightfully look at the evidence and say that he's legend. In fact, we know more about the historical Jesus than we do any other figure of that era, and it's not even close. And I really don't think he's a liar either. That seems to be a big logical jump. I mean, I'm a good liar. I've been doing it for 4 decades now. And I know that when I lie and when you lie, when we human beings lie, we lie for basically 3 reasons. We lie for sex, we lie for money, and we lie for power. You can put revenge into that last group, that I want to be right kind of thing, stubbornness or whatever. But the point is, when we lie, we gain something. And I'm a pretty stubborn man, but when they bring out the 6x6s and the nails that are this long and the hammer, the gig is up. I'm not dying for a lie. Not that way. What did Jesus gain for this so-called lie? Well, he gained a most excruciating death. It doesn't seem like a good answer. Well, maybe he's crazy. He's a lunatic. If I came up to you and said that I'm God Almighty, you would think that I was crazy. Actually, Albert Schweitzer, the great medical missionary, did his doctoral dissertation on this very question: was Jesus of Nazareth cuckoo? And the answer was no. There's nothing in the text that allows us to come to a conclusion, honestly, that there was something wrong with Jesus. In fact, he almost seems to be the only sane one in the group usually. And by the way, the burden of proof is on the person who says you're crazy, not the other way around. Right? Because otherwise we're in trouble. Because if I say that guy over there is crazy, and he says, no, I'm not, like, we can't listen to him because he's crazy. Right? So the burden of proof is on somebody else. That only leaves one left, and that is who Jesus claimed to be, and that's Lord Almighty. I don't think you can say legend. I don't think you can say liar. I don't think you can say lunatic. And so we're left with one, and that is Lord Almighty. It's a start of a conversation, perhaps. And so with this, what we're saying about Christianity is exactly what St. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 15, that this is a claim on reality, that Jesus is real. Just so you know, no other religion really talks about this. And I'm not criticizing other religions. I'm just saying these are just facts. They're not really concerned about claiming a historicity. Like if you took all of these other religions and maybe it did not actually happen that some of these stories in their sacred text really occurred in a time and a place, so what? There's still enough there. There's still this meta-narrative, this story that gives us a beginning and an end and a morality and a reason to live and some sort of culture. But not Christianity. In fact, in its own sacred text, the Bible, in its own sacred text, the Christians say if you can disprove this one event, the whole thing falls apart. Like there's nothing to redeem of a resurrection-less Christianity. There's no, Jesus is a nice kind of moral teacher. No, he's not. I'm sorry, but no, he's not. I know you've been told to do what Jesus does all the time, but there's a lot of times when you shouldn't do that. You know, like, don't pluck your eyeballs out. When your mother and brothers are there and they're bothering you, don't go, woman, why are you bothering me? Don't do that. You're not Jesus. And by the way, when we try to imitate Jesus, we become a cheap imitation of who he is, and that's not what God intended us to be. He intended us to be unique creatures in a unique situation. There's no imitating Jesus because I'm such a unique individual that there is no position that Jesus has been in that is this exact same that I'm going to be in. So I am better than a cheap imitation. I am actually the hand of God as he works through me in this particular situation in my vocation, but this is beside the point. So Jesus is not just your moral guide. I don't need him. I have a conscience. I don't need God incarnate to be a moral guide. I need God incarnate to be my Savior. And so St. Paul says, if Jesus did not rise from the dead, if he did not come down here and do the thing that he needs to do to save your sorry butt, then you shouldn't be a Christian, and we're lying to you, and this whole thing's a mess, and you should be pitied more than all men. Let me give you my translation. If you show me the dead bones of Jesus, then I'm not a Christian, and neither should you be a Christian. In fact, you're an idiot if you are. And we're lying to you. And you should be made fun of for it. And so Christianity says Jesus actually did this, and so now we're in the realm of apologetics. And so we should maybe define what apologetics is. Rev Sheb talked about this passage where we are encouraged by St. Peter to always be ready in love and tenderness to give an answer, to give a reason, I would say to make a case for our faith. And so the word apologia, where we get the word apologetics, is kind of a legal defense. And so you might imagine that you are a lawyer mounting a defense for a client to prove something. And you're going to slowly say, here's the evidence, and here is how I look at this, and here, take a look at this document, and here's an eyewitness account. And I slowly build a case. And all of these little things, they're not really that important. They don't prove anything. But I give a preponderance of evidence kind of case, and I say, this is plausible, maybe not even plausible, but probable. And so as Christians, we might say, when someone comes up and says, why do you believe this stuff? And the worst thing you can do, even though it's true, is say, the Bible tells me so. But you have to say, I've thought this through a little bit, and this worldview does make a lot of sense. It's not why I believe, but it makes a lot of sense. And that whole kind of thing, that righteous indignation that you have, friend, I mean, that seems that there is a morality out there, right? That you're drawing upon. And my story has an answer to what or who that morality is, but my story also has something that no other worldview does, and that is a mechanism for forgiveness and for love and ultimate peace. Okay, so finally, when we look at what apologetics is, first thing is using reason to make a case for Christianity and for specific things of Christianity. But finally, I think it's a ministry of caring. Like, I care about your doubts, and you all have them, right? I mean, I know right now that I'm standing before 50 or 60 unbelievers. Even if you're a believer, I can't see in your heart, I don't know. But I do know that even if you are a believer, as a sinner saint, you're also an unbeliever, that you have doubts. And I care about them enough that I'm willing to talk to you about them. And if I don't have an answer, I'll maybe go read a book. And maybe my answer is not going to be a home run. In fact, I know it won't be. It never will be. But I'll be there to answer all of these questions and hopefully build a preponderance of evidence, to build a case for this worldview. Now, you may be thinking right away, but this has nothing to do with faith. And what about faith? So I'm going to talk about faith, and I'm going to use Latin because that makes me feel superior and you inferior. And this is what academics do, because all academics were beat up in the 4th grade, and they're trying to make up for it. All right. So we might take faith and divide it up or give 3 aspects: notitia, assensus, and fiducia. Notitia, think knowledge. Assensus, think agreement or assent. And fiducia, think trust, like a fiduciary responsibility of a bank. Now, does the devil know that there is a God that exists? Notitia. You bet. Does the devil agree, assensus, that Jesus is the Son of God who came to die on the cross to save sinners from a very awful, awful predicament? You bet. That's why he's working so hard against you. But does the devil, fiducia, trust God? Absolutely not. So as an apologist, as an evangelist, as just a human being here, I can do notitia and assensus, but I cannot touch fiducia. This is the Spirit who does this, who takes people who have bound hearts, slaves to sin, and makes them slaves to righteousness, changes their hearts, makes them trust in God the Father and His Son. So apologetics is in the realm of notitia and assensus. Fiducia, that's where the Spirit does His work, and I'm glad to let the Spirit do that. Oh, and by the way, you as a person who is going to have a conversation at least some point in their life, I would imagine, with a skeptical friend or relative, you do not have to, nor can you, prove certainty. The idea of being certain in something is not a biblical concept. It is a modern concept. There's a modern concept that says that we can figure it all out. We can put all the information into encyclopedia. Or we can have even this got into the church, we can have a set of dogmatics notes and books that can answer all the questions. Given enough time, we human beings who are so fantastically great will be able to figure out all of knowledge and overcome just about everything, maybe even death. And we are absolutely certain of these things. And there was this idea of an unlimited promise of science and an unlimited trajectory of progress. And then World War I and World War II and Korea and Vietnam, and those are just the ones in the Western world. Right? And we became disillusioned with these people who thought they had all of the answers. And I think that is a correct criticism. We can't know anything for certainty. Only in fiducia does the Spirit come and give you a faith that makes you certain of things you cannot see. I'll prove it to you that you can't be certain of anything. There's a little box right there, if you can't see it. How do I know that if I step right there, that I don't fall into a sinkhole? Happens every week in Florida on the news we hear. Every week in Florida there's a sinkhole. The car goes in. How do I know? I don't know. I don't know for sure. How do you know today when you go get into your car and you turn the ignition that it doesn't blow up because somebody has attached a bomb to the gas tank? You don't know. But you don't go looking under your car every time you get into it. You might tonight. Here you are. Here you are. What would your grandmothers think? Here you are in college, just walking around, turning car ignitions, living this kind of lifestyle. The truth is we don't go by certainty, we go by probability. In everything we do. And I've been around enough that I'll walk in there and I'll be okay. Without any fear. In fact, I'll do it, I won't even think about it because my brain has computed the odds of all of this. And I've lived long enough to know that I'm not important enough for somebody to assassinate me. So I'm going to turn my car, I'm not going to even think about it. I'm not going to even think about it. Here's the point. You're not certain of anything, and that's okay. We go by probability, but we have been given a gift in the Spirit that we can be certain of certain things that are beyond us. It's an ultimate gift that we don't think about very often. So as an apologist, I do not have to prove certainty. I only have to prove possibility, plausibility, and perhaps, hopefully, probability. Is it plausible that Jesus is the Son of Man? I would say it's even probable. But I don't have to do certainty. That's the Spirit's job. Okay, let's start with what we call resurrection apologetics. This is the claim of Christianity. It is a claim on reality. The claim goes like this. Jesus was dead, and then a little bit later he wasn't dead, and there were people who saw both states, and they were willing to die for the cause. Now, everybody agrees that there was an empty tomb. Everybody agrees that the people tried to seal up the tomb, the Romans, that they did that. Everybody agrees that these people actually believe that they saw Jesus. There are like 3, 4, 5, 6 facts that everybody agrees upon, whether they're atheist or Christian or not. Can you build from those facts a pretty good case, and a apologia, that it is plausible, if not probable, that Jesus rose from the dead? And this is what we call resurrection apologetics. So let's think about this. I'm putting on my hat like I'm a historian, like I'm a cold case detective, and I start to think about this and I say, well, who had access to the body? Well, here are the people who had access to the body. You had the Jewish leaders, you had the Roman authorities, and you have the disciples. Now, we know that he died, and we know that there was an empty tomb, so what happened to the body? We don't have the body. Well, would the Roman soldiers steal the body? No. They were really good at killing people, and if they didn't kill people, then they might get killed, the soldiers. And so they were the ones who said, we're going to kill this person. It doesn't make sense that they would say they're going to kill somebody and not kill them. They wanted this done. The Jewish leaders, well, they're the ones who wanted him dead in the first place, so I don't think, in fact, they seemed paranoid that there would be a ruse about Jesus being resurrected from the dead, because they knew better than the disciples, because they knew, I think he predicted that he was going to rise from the dead. The disciples, give me a break. Are you kidding me? Only John's there, the youngest. Everybody else scatters. You think those boneheads could put together a conspiracy? At this moment, there's no way. There's no way. And why would they? If you notice, they don't have any faith. Peter denies his Lord. Peter is not Peter again until he gets the Spirit at Pentecost. Thomas, he does not believe right away. It takes him to have a physical appearance and physical interaction with Jesus, right? And so there's no way that they would do this. And even if they did try to hide the body and pretend that Jesus was alive, remember our rule about lying. What would they gain? Did they gain a bunch of women? Check mark number 1. Did they gain a bunch of money? You guys walked in the right time, softball team. All right. Did they gain money for this? No. Did they gain any power? No. By the way, this is important, that the Christian church was persecuted for the first few hundred years. We go, that's sad, but this was one of the greatest gifts that God gave. He twisted that. He made what was bad something good. And here's why. Because people will claim that they made stuff up about Jesus being true God and true man, resurrection, virgin birth, miracles, all that kind of stuff, in a power play to gain control of the Christian church. But the facts on the ground say there was no power play. They were dying. They were being persecuted for their faith. So there's no reason to believe that the disciples would steal the body. So we're left with this thing that says Jesus was dead, and everybody know he's dead. Everybody agrees the Romans were good at killing. Then there was an empty tomb, and Jesus was alive, and there are people who claim to see him alive. You got to deal with those facts. Now, by the way, this is very important because this helps us out of what we call circular logic. So if you go up to somebody and you say, why do you believe? Because the Bible told me so. By the way, you got to move off of being a 4-year-old Christian. All right? You got to be a little bit more in depth than that. And you're like, well, and then the person says, well, why do you believe the Bible? And you're like, well, because it's God's word. And you're like, how do you know it's God's word? And you say, because the Bible said so. And you're like, why should I trust the Bible? Because it's God's word. How do you know that? Because the Bible said so. You see the circular logic? I can put in anything in there. I can put Quran in there. I can put me in there. I can say, give me all your money. And say, why do you do it? Because I'm God. Well, why should I trust you? I just told you I'm God. Right? It's not going to work. So how do I get out of this circular logic? Here's how. I believe that God's word is infallible and it's inerrant and it's sufficient for my salvation and it's trustworthy. And I know this not just because it says so, although that's important, because Jesus said so and he rose from the dead. And I'm going with the guy who rose from the dead and not you. Now, there ain't no come to Jesus moments here. It's not like everybody's going to like fall around me like, oh, glory, hallelujah at this moment. They're not going to do that. But I have refuted the argument that I'm in circular logic because I'm not. I got facts on the ground. Jesus said, and he backed it up with a resurrection. Okay, there's more to the story, but we need to keep moving. Now you may be thinking, well, all of this depends on the New Testament text. How do I know what's in my hand right now is actually what Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John actually wrote, right? This is a very difficult question, and it takes a whole lot of nerddom to figure it all out. I'm just going to give you a little bit of tidbits in how we do this. An autograph is what Matthew put with his pen on the papyrus, and Paul and Mark and Luke. We don't have those because the papyrus was never going to last. You ever get a Walmart receipt and you find it like a year later and it's like biodegradable already, it's like, that's papyrus. So we don't have those. But we do have what we call manuscripts, which are copies of those original autographs. And we got lots of them from the New Testament. So what we do is we put these manuscripts together, like we found in a cave, John and half of Mark. And over here we got Galatians, Ephesians, and 1 Thessalonians, but not 2 Thessalonians, and none of the Gospels. And we put together these pieces of paper and we figure out historically what was originally written by the hand of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It's a fascinating story, at least to me, but you'll have to come to one of the courses to get the whole story. I'm going to jump to the end, to the payoff, and it's this. That we have over 5,600 little manuscripts that are maybe about 150 years removed from the original autographs. I'm not including quotes by sermons. I'm not including translations. I'm only talking in the Greek. I'm talking about 5,600. If we add all of them, it's the tens of thousands. And I got a gap between the manuscript and the first autograph, about 150, maybe 200, 250 years, which seems like a lot, but it's not. And I still have things in there. I'm just talking about real solid manuscripts. In comparison, Julius Caesar's Gallic Wars, which is a very important historical document. We have a grand total, and I'm talking good manuscripts, we got pieces here and there, but good manuscripts, we have a grand total of 10. And the amount of time between when Julius Caesar put pen to papyrus and the first manuscript we have is 950 years. It's not even close. But nobody goes around saying, who knows if Julius Caesar really existed? Who knows if there is this mystical place called Gaul? And probably wasn't even an emperor at all. Those were just people that were making stuff up and trying to create this cult of Julius Caesar, right? If you're going to be honest, and that's all we're saying here, we want to take the regular day reason that the skeptic uses and look at the evidence with an actual open mind. If you would throw out Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John as historical documents, then you have to throw out everything from Greco-Roman history, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, the Hittites, pretty much everything until the late medieval age. But you don't do that. But somehow you do it with Jesus. Now, there's some gaps there that we need to get across. I can answer those questions for you. If they bother you, you can email me, or better yet, come to our class. But we need to move on just a little bit. I want to give one more detail about the authenticity of the New Testament text. Your English professors will tell you, do not write anything in another accent other than your own, because you'll never be able to fake it. So you don't write in an Irish accent. People who actually know their stuff will look at that and say that's a fraud. It's very difficult to fake stuff like this. And that's because we actually can pinpoint somebody by their accent or the words that they use from a mile away. And you can do it yourself. Like if I came up to you and I said, oofta, you're like, you lived in Minnesota, at least for a little bit. If I said, bless her heart, and then I talk bad about her, that would mean I'm from Texas. I've lived in both. Now, let's just imagine you open up to Matthew chapter 5, and there's a list of the disciples. And like Jesus called his disciples, Colton, Dakota, and Logan. Like, those are white boy names from America in the 20th century. Those aren't first century Palestinian boy names. You can smell this out, right? And so when we look at all of these things in the scriptures, we start to see that they got the boys' names right. I mean, we don't have a book that says top 10 boys' names in Jerusalem, but we have grave records. They got the names right. We know that only people in Galilee would call the Lake of Galilee the Sea of Galilee. It's not a sea, it's a lake. They got that right. They got Gethsemane right. They got it right that you go from Jerusalem down to Jericho even though you're going north. That you go down from Cana to Capernaum, all these things. You can't tell me that a bunch of drunk monks in 400 AD in a power play in the church made up stories about a virgin birth and a resurrection, and they got all the details right. They got the accents right. They got all of these things right. They didn't have access to the internet. They didn't go and scope it out. And even if they would try to go and scope it out, first of all, we're talking this is weird conspiracy theory stuff, are we? I mean, this is hard to believe. But even if they did that, why would they travel there to find out these details? Again, I'm a very good liar. You don't put details into a lie. I don't need to make sure that I know that it was called the Garden of Gethsemane. Don't need to put that in there. I just don't need to do it, right? So all of these things stand alone really don't matter much, but if you put them together, this says these texts, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are grade A history. They're grade A history, and they should be accepted for the era and the time as absolutely certain we know what Jesus said and did. And by the way, this has only been attacked because of a guy named Walter Bauer who said, this is just a theory of mine, competing Christianities, and they're making stuff up later. I have no proof of this. But this guy named Dan Brown got a hold of it and wrote a couple books, one of them the Da Vinci Code. And by the time it came down to kind of the popular way we think about things, CNN and your Facebook feed or whatever, it became gospel truth, when there really has been discredited by just about every real historian, except a guy named Bart Ehrman, but we'll talk about that maybe later. All right, so the New Testament text, there's a lot more to that story, but suffice to say, they are actually the best kind of history from the era. It's not even close. Let's talk about prophecy and probability. We already talked about I don't have to prove probability. However, probability can also work to prove something beyond a shadow of a doubt to a moral certainty where I go, you know what, I'm pretty sure. So let's say you go to bed tonight and the last thing you see on your phone is a news flash that says, local man wins $500 million in the lottery, and you go to bed sleeping, what a lucky son of a gun. I wonder what I would do with $500 million. 1 year from tonight, you go to bed, and the last thing on your phone is this guy wins $500 million. Same guy. And you go to bed thinking, wow, that's luck. Why is he playing the lottery when he already won? I don't know. And you fall asleep. 2 years from now, the last thing on your phone before you go to bed is a news flash. Same guy. Same lottery. $500 million again. Now what's the news story about? Fraud investigation, because ain't nobody that lucky. Right? What are the odds that one person in Palestine in the first century could fulfill all the prophecies of the Old Testament? Now, depending on you number the prophecies of the Old Testament about Christ, we can get up to 300. Some of them are just like types of Christ shadows. So for sake of argument, I'm going to eliminate everything that is vague. You know, like Jesus is the cornerstone. Okay. There's no way to prove or disprove that from a logical point of view. Okay, for the sake of argument, I am going to eliminate everything that could be faked. So I suppose Jesus is like, I really want to be the Messiah. And so I know from Zechariah that we got to ride a donkey up Jerusalem one day. So one day, he's like, guys, we're going to do this, all right? Go get a donkey and we're going to ride it. Okay, I'll eliminate it. Now, let's say I'm down to like 10. I don't know, 10. And you guys tell them how great Apologetics course is.
It's great.
Thank you. I told them to lie for me. All right. Now, let's say we're down to like 10. and I'll give you good odds. I'll give you like 1 in 4. So one out of every 4 Jewish men was born in Bethlehem. I'll give you 1 in 4. I'm giving you great odds. 1 in 4 that every Jewish man was betrayed by his friends for 30 pieces of silver. I'll give you 1 in 4 odds that 1 in every 4 Jewish man was pierced right here, and that people gambled for us. I mean, I could find 10 that you can't make up. You don't choose to be born in Bethlehem, right? It's not like Jesus said, please gamble for my clothes, don't ask why, right? So if I put out the numbers, 1 in 4 to like the 10th power, 10 times of that, the odds of that are astronomical. You don't take chances like that in your life. You don't go, well, that guy just won the lottery every year. You don't live your life by taking those long of odds. So the probability, right, that somebody else could fulfill all of these, but rather than the true Son of God, seems astronomically impossible. It's just math, people. All right. Now, what we have here is, we don't talk about this enough, we have a complete scroll of Isaiah. So this is kind of like, this is a big deal, and it was stuck in one of those Dead Sea Scroll caves, right? You've heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And this has been carbon dated to like 100 and 300 years before Christ. It's been scribally dated to about 100 to 150. So let's just say 125 years before Christ. Scribal dating is the words that they use and the way they write their letters, we can depict something. So like if someone came and said, I found this authentic letter from Abraham Lincoln, and clearly it's using like Times New Roman off a computer, you're like, I can date that. It ain't 1862, right? So I can scribally date something to 125 years before Christ. And the whole point of this is that it's BC before Christ. And if you read Isaiah, it really, 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 Isaiah 52 and 53 really kind of sounds like Jesus dying on the cross. So we have a document that was written before the actions, and then the things came true. And if we can get to 10 of those things, which I think we can, the odds of that are astronomical. Could it be possible? Sure. But I don't live that way. And if you did, dear skeptic friend, you would be curled up in the fetal position, too afraid to get out of bed in the morning, because there are better odds that there's a sinkhole right there, and there, and there, and there. Okay. All right. Let's get a little philosophical here. When we talk about cosmology, we talk about causes. And so basically we're talking about contingency here. So this remote did not just pop into existence, but it's contingent on things. It's contingent on the person who made it, who made the different parts, who designed it. It has to have a bigger purpose, such as the technology of PowerPoint. Someone had to buy it. Someone had to place it. There's a lot of causes that put this remote into my hand right here. It did not just go, boom, right? You are contingent on your parents who are contingent on their parents who are contingent on their parents, and so on and so on and so on, right? Things just don't pop into existence. So we have a problem if we have an infinite amount of causes. We finally have to get with Aristotle and say there must have been an uncaused cause of first cause. We'll call it God, but we don't have to, right? We have an uncaused cause. Now, I think everybody would agree upon this, except the person who says, I don't want to have an uncaused cause. And so I got to make some mental gymnastics here to get to a theory where there is not a cause. So maybe the universe just caused itself. It just boom into existence. Well, I suppose maybe it's a big bang. All right, whatever. But a Big Bang assumes a Big Banger. Right? So you can't really have a self-causing universe. Another thing to think about is that there is only a certain amount of energy, and the energy is fine. This one's a little, I'm not quite sure about this, but I think it's fairly decent. We have a finite amount of energy, and energy cannot be created or destroyed, but it can be used up. Right? You learned that in high school. You did. I don't remember that, but I'm sure you did. And when all the energy is used up, we have what's called heat death or entropy, and then we just don't exist. Like, hopefully it's not tomorrow. Well, if the universe is eternal, and it just keeps going around and around, and there was no beginning and there's no end, we would have already used up all the energy. But I'm still here. We're thinking about this. The universe cannot be past eternal, right? It can be future eternal, but it cannot be past eternal, and here's why. Because if it was eternal, that means that there would be an infinite amount of moments in the past. Now, if there are an infinite amount of moments in the past, that means between moment A, when I began this sentence, and moment B, when I ended this sentence, there would be an infinite amount of time in between those two moments. And how would we ever get to the end of the sentence? Because how can you transverse an infinite amount of moments? Huh? Right? Now, that's besides the point a little bit. It's a parlor trick, right? It's cute. But I think it proves something, that there's got to be a beginning. And if there is a beginning, there has to be a beginner. And that beginning cannot be uncaused, but it has to be caused. And that cause needs to be a person in the sense that it's personal. It's not impersonal. It has a mind. And it is outside of time and space. And it's pretty darn powerful and pretty darn smart, and a free agent. Because nothing can force it to do things. You don't want to use the G word, that's fine. But I think from logic we get to this point here. Oh, and by the way, in my faith, we're created in the image of this God, which means all the rationality and the beauty and the complexity that comes with that, but also freedom. And isn't that so much better than being tied to my biological impulses? I'm just saying, right? Seems to explain things in a more profound way. Now, philosophy, this is philosophical stuff, and scientists don't like philosophy. In fact, they tried to kick philosophy out of the university and did a very good job of it, to the point where you guys don't even have to take a philosophy course anymore, and that's a crying shame, because we have a lot of bad philosophy out there, and we have what we call now kind of a silo effect, where we have the hard sciences over here, so like chemistry and biology and physics, and then we have the soft sciences over here, like the humanities, like English and history and theology and psychology and philosophy. And over here, I'm willing to bet that you kind of had this kind of just sort of told to you, not explicitly, but it was just there. Over here is opinion. But over here is fact. And you got your faith life on Sunday morning, barely, and then you got the rest of the world, and at some point you got to make a decision whether you're going to be an unthinking Christian or you're going to be a thinking human being that's not Christian. But I would suggest that's not the history of the university. That's not the history of Christianity. That is only recent. It had a long story, but it's only recent, where somehow we have portrayed Christianity as and the church does this, as an unthinking, not very thoughtful, not very bright entity. And it becomes science versus faith, and that's not the history of either science or faith. And so don't fall into that trap. Now, I totally get why the science people are like just mad at philosophy, right? You know, like let me tell you why a scientist needs to have philosophy. So what I just said was cute about there can be nothing that comes out of nothing. But scientists will say, oh, but quantum vacuums and this is the ether and the nothing or whatever. And then I say, but that's not a nothing. An empty space is not actually a nothing. Space is not nothing. A quantum vacuum is not nothing. No, I mean an actual nothing, right? And this is what philosophers do. Now, think about what an actual nothing is tonight. It'll ruin your night. What an actual nothing is. But because they didn't think about that and they said, well, this space that doesn't have something is a nothing, and so it doesn't need to be created. Like, no, that still needs to be created because you're talking about space, the universe, right? And they're not thinking philosophically. At the same point, I know the scientists are looking at the philosophers and they're like, like in 1860, like, Friedrich, what are you doing curled up in the corner? And he's like, Hans, I'm contemplating what nothing is. And you're like, Friedrich, we're trying to cure polio here, you worthless piece of, like, you're not helping us. This is worthless. The philosophy and religion is worthless. It doesn't fix our problems, right? And so I think your generation, by the way, I can already sense it, you're putting things back together. Remember when I made fun of you guys about plastic and paper straws? You took something that was physical and scientific and you made it a soul thing because you made it moralistic. You are holistic where you have put these two things together, and that's a good thing, although it's annoying to the rest of us. It's a good thing that you're putting these things together, and I have great hope that you guys will put religion and philosophy back with science, and you'll have those scientists maybe take a philosophy class, and you'll say to us theologians, you know what, maybe you should take some science. Maybe you should not be a Bible thumper who says, just believe it or get out of my church. Right? Okay. Let's switch gears here and talk about the moral argument for the existence of God. The moral argument for the existence of God is basically this. If you think that there is a right or wrong, or there are duties, there are obligations, then you need a reference point that is outside of you. So I can't say it's wrong to discriminate against another race. I can't say that just because I think it. I need to have something up there that says why. That why is these people were created in the image of God. And you have an obligation to love and respect. Because if we are only going around and saying, I as a human being make the rules, then I can't go to another human being and I say, here's the rules, because you have different rules than me. And so the great civil rights activists could not go into the Deep South and say to the KKK, you're wrong, unless they were pointing to a reference outside of them that the KKK could look about. Get what I'm saying? So we have a huge problem with Nazi Germany. This gets played out in real history because the Nazis technically really didn't do anything illegal. They just changed the laws before they did what they did. So you have to say there's a law above the law. We made that international law in The Hague. Now the problem with that is there needs to be a law above that law. Because who gets to make up that international law? You know who does not like the international law? The United States. Right? We don't like to take the sovereignty away from a specific nation. So I think this is very simple. Now, how would I come up with morality if I don't believe that there is the existence of God? But now, by the way, I'm not saying you have to believe in God in order to be good. That's not what we're saying. I'm just saying you can't say there's good and bad unless there is something outside of us, an absolute morality. So how do people come up and think with that? I don't want to make fun of it, and it is more complicated than that, but it really, when you boil it down, it is really kind of silly. For instance, we're tribes, right? We've evolved enough that we got these little tribes. This is 2 million years ago or whatever, and less than that. And we got these little tribes here, and there's animals and there's other tribes that attack us, And some of our boys are big and strong. And they got a mean streak to them. And so they go out and they fight these other people. And they protect the tribe. And we say, that's admirable. We're going to call that courage. Even though it's just biological instincts, we're going to call that courage. And then the women in the tribe go, I want to have babies with those people. And so they have these genes that are passed down over the generations. And then once after these tribes kind of settle into cities a little bit more, and we have fortifications and we're not constantly brawling, we're stuck with all these men who are kind of jackasses, And so then we have these boys that are a little bit not jackassy, and you're like, the women are like, I kind of like that. And so they have babies with that, and we call that someone who is compassionate and patient and kind. Now notice what I'm saying here is that there's no such thing as courage or compassion or kind or any of those other words. We're just calling these biological impulses and our desire as selfish beings to keep the species around, we're just calling it that. There's no such thing as love. We just call it love because it's just biological impulses. There is no such thing as right or wrong or love or anything like that. We just call it that. So if that's true, and this is a claim of many very sophisticated writers, if that's true, then 18 years ago, I should have got down on my knee before my soon-to-be fiancé and wife. I would say, Amanda, I have these biological impulses to keep the species alive and make babies with you. Will you marry me? And she says, yes, 1,000 times yes, right? No, I said, I love you. And that's a real thing. And the only way that love can be a real thing is if that there is something more than just a pile of molecules right here, but rather that there's a soul. And if there's a soul, then there is explanations beyond just naturalism, right? So let's stay on, I'm all over the place now. Let's stay here with science and philosophy. So when I define naturalism, I'm defining that in a specific way that all there is nature. There's no supernatural things like angels, souls, or God. Okay? So methodological naturalism is what you used in chemistry, what you use in biology. And that is when we determine things in the hard sciences, our methodological, we are only going to use natural causes in our hypothesis. This is really good for science. So I throw a rock down and a feather down, and I go, the rock goes faster. And why is that? And I'm going to say there's a natural cause like gravity. What I'm not going to do is I'm not going to say, well, an angel came and floated down this feather because at one point angels had feathers and they are kind to feathers. Now, this seems silly, but this is actually really close to what Aristotle said. Aristotle said, the telos, the final goal of a rock is to be at the center of the earth, and that's why it drops fast. That's why there's, right? Now, we figured it out, it's gravity, right? Okay, so methodological naturalism is okay as far as it goes. Like, we shouldn't say, well, God came, and that's why, because you couldn't really do science there. But I should leave open the possibility of a supernatural occurrence, if I'm going to be truly open-minded. So metaphysical naturalism takes the next step and says, there is no such thing but only nature. No God, no spirit, no soul, no angels, no nothing, only nature. Now, this is very close-minded, isn't it? And it doesn't really explain a lot even in science. For instance, there are plenty of things in science where we don't have empirical evidence. Like, who of you has seen an atom Like an actual, like show me. Pull out an atom of your pocket right now. It's just a theory. We take the data and we say it makes sense that this would look this way, this thing called an atom. And that's perfectly acceptable and fine. I don't need to have an actual empirical touch everything to figure things out. And remember, I'm going by probability, not by certainty. Okay. When someone says, we can only know truth, so I'm writing this sentence. Think about this sentence in front of you. We can only know something is true if it is a mathematical proof, like, 1 plus 1 equals 2. Or we can empirically verify it and theoretically come up with a experiment that could falsify it. Okay? That sentence right there is kind of a hallmark of kind of scientism, not science. Scientism that says, because we cannot run an experiment to prove or disprove God, therefore God doesn't exist. Because we cannot run an experiment to prove or disprove the soul, therefore it doesn't exist. So we cannot talk about it. That sentence right there is not a mathematical proof, nor can it be verified in a laboratory. It's philosophy. So you can't get rid of philosophy. So you got to pull poor Friedrich out from the corner, dust him off, and say, get with it, man. We need your help. All right? So think about that for a second. That to know knowledge, I cannot be limited. I cannot be limited just to nature. I'm always going to have a philosophy. I'm always going to have a philosophy. If my philosophy is I have to limit my knowledge to nature, I have a philosophy, it's just a very poor one. Get what I'm saying? So we have to allow for philosophy and religion in these things. Okay, let's go. How much time I got, Sheb?
3 minutes.
3 minutes? Okay.
I assume you can palm this out, right?
All right. Let's do the problem of evil because this is probably where the rubber hits the road, okay? So let's just imagine, because that's the biggest question, how could there be a God who would allow these certain things? I've skipped a thing that said, is God a moral monster, right? Because you look in the Old Testament, you're like, holy crap, God is like genocide, kill these people, whatever. Remember how angry you get the next time someone cuts you off in the freeway. Your roommate does this. How much you cannot control your anger. When you watch TV and you see some injustice against turtles or against 2 cute little girls in Milwaukee, right? You heard that story. How much anger you had. Well, when God was looking at the ancient Near East, he saw child sacrifice, he saw gang rape, he is more patient than we give him credit for. And it's only middle-class Americans that say, geez, God, what's the big deal? Why are you so angry? But if you're in a third world country, your criticism is God has not been punishing the greedy West, right? All right, hold on. Give me more minutes. So it comes down to this idea of why did bad things happen to good people? Now, the first thing is what good people, right? But what people mean is why did bad things happen to me if there was a God? So option number 1, God is not powerful enough to stop evil. Sometimes the devil wins, sometimes God wins. Good luck. Option number 2 is God's not loving enough to stop evil. Good luck. Third option is that there is no God. Really good luck. Then it's just one crappy thing after another. And then you die. Well, I mean, this is a very sad worldview. And I think you got to point it out to people. But may I suggest that there's a fourth option, and the fourth option is the theology of the cross. And that is where God says, this looks bad, but it's actually good. And this that you think is good is actually bad. If the goal is that you trust in Jesus, and the opposite of trusting in Jesus is trusting in yourself, then perhaps God has got to beat the false piety out of you before he gives you Christ. And if it takes cancer, it'll take cancer. Think of Job. So the devil comes, and he's going back and forth, and he says to God, nobody loves you. They all hate you. And God says, you don't know anything, devil. What about Job? He loves me. And the devil says, but Job's wealthy, and he's the most popular guy around. Of course he loves you. If you let me at him, he'll curse you and die. And what does God say? Go ahead. But here's the rule. You can't take his life. And then the devil comes after Job and takes away his wealth, and he takes away his health, and he takes away his family. And under that pressure, Job does not crack, but rather that piece of coal, like in a mine, under that pressure comes the beautiful diamond that we still sing on in Easter season. I know that my Redeemer lives. Job says, in my flesh I stand upon the earth. He's given the middle finger to death and the devil. In my flesh, like St. Paul does, right? Where, O death, is your victory? In my flesh I stand upon the earth, and I will see. I know that my Redeemer lives. Now, listen, I don't know if God and the devil have a monthly staff meeting, but let's say they do. And they're coming around, and God's like, and God's like, the devil seems a little happy today. What are you up to? And the devil's like, nobody loves you. And he's like, what about my people at Point of Grace? And he's like, look at the fancy stuff. They got like ballroom things right up there, you know. Like, they look at the cars. They're going to school for obscene amounts of money, and they're wealthy, right? If you let me at them, they'll curse you and die. And God has a list there, and he says, Connor, no cancer for him, but everything else. It says, Faith, you can take her health, but I want her to have money. And he goes down the line. That seems to me that God is in charge of evil. The fourth option, God is in charge of evil. And even if your skeptical friend says that's a bunch of BS, what you say is, you know what? My worldview has a meaning for suffering and yours doesn't. No, none of the other options has any meaning for suffering. And if life is going to have meaning, and you're going to walk around and be self-righteous, and you're going to say, I have meaning, I have value. If you're going to walk around, that means that suffering has to have meaning, because if suffering doesn't have meaning, then half of life, and that's on a good day in America, doesn't have any meaning. And it's just random crap. But I say that my God loves me enough to hide behind the mask of the devil for my good. And even though I cannot understand it in this great cosmic universe that he has explained for me, I know that my Redeemer lives. And it's proof of that, beyond a shadow of a doubt to a moral certainty. I know that I'm going to be okay, and I know you're going to be okay too. All right, good enough, Sheb? All right, thanks, man.